Alright, you book brats, it's time for my full summary and review of A Court of Wings and Ruin. So let's get right into it. Start at the beginning, shall we? By the way, spoiler alert. Welcome to Prythian, the land of throat-bobbing, toe-curling, and tongue-clicking, where everybody flicks invisible lint off of their shirt and they say the word mate more times than an Australian pub. Meet Feyre, a 19-year-old know-it-all who's trying to get every man to side with her and turn against one another. Like a high school girl trying to win prom queen in an early 2000s teen flick. She's completely destroying this kingdom from the inside out, gathering intel to send back to her partner named Reese's Pieces through some sort of spiritual magical bond that they share. There's a guy named Tamlin who is basically a 500-year-old toddler, and a guy named Lucian who is a cross between Ron Weasley and Mad-Eye Moody if they had a thing for foxes. So she's playing all of these angles, and at one point she steals the sun's power from some nympho chick like she's a solar panel on a roof. At one point she decides that she's gathered enough intel and she wants to go back home to the Night Court, so she starts to run away. So she's running through the Forbidden Forest on the way home, and on the way there she sees Lucian and Nympho Chick engaging in a game of non-consensual pickle tickle. She sees this and doesn't like it, so she infiltrates Nympho Chick's mind and makes her start hitting herself in the head with a rock like a horrible game of why you hitting yourself between an older brother and a younger brother. Just then the twins, Thing 1 and Thing 2, come out of the woods to stand off against Feyre, but Feyre completely destroys them because she is a superhero at this point. So she saves Lucy Boosie, but unfortunately all their powers are drained now, so they can't just apparate to the Night Court. They gotta stay in a cave for a little bit to gain energy. While they're in this cave, Lucian's brothers come to try to kill them, but luckily they escape in the nick of time. But unfortunately they're trying to cross this lake and they look out and they see the bad boy brothers who are wearing very evil smiles because nothing says villain like a grin and a giggle. But luckily 2 of the Bat Street boys come in and save them. They take them away and they go to the Night Court. So Fey gets to see her husband again, old Reese with the big piece, and of course they smash instantly. Afterward, Mad-Eye Ronnie gets in an argument with Reese Piece because he still thinks that Reese Piece is a bad guy. They go see Feyre's sisters, Nesta, who is a real jerk to this point, and Elaine, who likes to mope and stare out of windows. Oh, and she has the spiritual gift of prophecy. But nobody knows that. They just treat her like an old lady with dementia. Then they go see the Talking Book. They have a meeting to discuss how much they all hate the King of Hybern because he made Nesta and Elaine immortal, when in reality they should be writing him a thank you letter. They talk about how they need to get all the High Lords of the gated communities of Prythian together to figure out how to defeat the Lord of Hybern. Feyre brings up this point that, hey, that could potentially get bloody because none of us really like each other. So Rhysand tells her that, hey, we'll meet in this location where it's magical and there's an unspoken agreement where we can't hurt each other. So it's essentially the Continental from John Wick. But first, Feyre takes Cassian, one of the Bat Street boys, to Azkaban to talk to a thing called the Bone Boy to try to get him to fight for them. The Bone Boy tells him, hey, I'll fight for you, but first I need you to go get the Mirror of Erised. But be careful, because if you look into it, you'll go crazy. Then they go back. Lucian has a conversation with Elaine because we found out in the last book that they're penguin lovers, and so they're trying to get that bond going. They go to this place called the Nightmare Court to try to figure out the location of the Mirror of Erised. Then they go back and talk to Elaine, who says that 2 ravens are coming, which any sane person would think that's a prophecy, but instead they just look at her and say, bless your heart. The next day, 2 guys called the Ravens show up to try to kidnap Nesta and Feyre while they're browsing the restricted section of the library. They manage to get away because they find this ethereal, dark, page master type demon that ends up killing the Ravens. Turns out the 2 Ravens were working for the King of Hybern. He wanted to take Nesta specifically because she stole something when she was dipped in the clawfoot bathtub we read about in the last book. Now everyone knows Elaine is a seer. Finally. Then the King of Hybern randomly attacks this place called the Summer Court, so Feyre and her Goonies step in to save the town. And Feyre goes back to the Bone Boy to tell him, I don't want to get the mirror, just be on my team. And he's like, I want the mirror. And she's like, I don't want to get the mirror. He's like, well, I'm not going to help you. And she's like, fine then. Then finally, all the High Lords of the gated communities of Prythian get together at this magical HOA meeting to talk about how to defeat the king. But everybody's there, including Tammy Boy. So that whole thing about, we won't fight, we'll be friendly, went out the window pretty much instantly. We find out who Lucian's real dad is. We find out that Nesta has a built-in Amber Alert that's connected to the magical bathtub. And then the king breaks the wall that separates the human world from the Fey world so the White Walkers can come in. Now it's all hands on deck. We gotta figure out how to defeat the King of Hybern. Elaine has a great idea, but Feyre doesn't like it. But she gets over that and goes and makes a deal with the mythical page master she found in the library to try to get her to fight for them. Then they go to Elaine's fiance's house, but first they take some polyjuice potion to try to hide the fact that they're high fae. Feyre. Then they see Jurian, who used to be an eyeball and was thought to be a bad guy, but after taking a swim in the magical waters of the bathtub, he came out a whole person and a good guy. Then Juri tells everybody that once Tammy Boy left the magical HOA meeting, he went crying instantly to King Daddy and told him everything they talked about. Which gives the readers to this point just another reason to hate Teacher's Pet Tammy. Then the battle begins between the good guys and the King of Hybern and his army. While this is going on, Feyre decides that she's gonna bounce real quick and go talk to Mr. T in the woods, so she says, "Peace out, I'll be back." Then Feyre finds Mr. T in the woods and asks him, "Hey, how do we defeat the King of Hybern?" Then Mr. T looks at Feyre and says, "Why don't you use Nesta, since she's connected to the cauldron?" The whole time I'm thinking, duh! Then Nympho Chick shows up with a couple guys and shoots Mr. T in the neck with an ash arrow. As Mr. T's bleeding out, Feyre gets Nympho Chick and her clan to chase her all the way to Rumpelstiltskin's house, who immediately eats them. Then Feyre goes back to Mr. T, holds Mr. T, and watches Mr. T die in her arms, and that's probably the saddest part of the book. Then she goes back to the war and sees Morrigan, and Morrigan is mad that Feyre left the war. Obviously. Then Nesta uses this makeshift Ouija board to find the precise location of the magical bathtub, but in doing so opens up this portal to where the bathtub can now reach them. And then the book describes the magical bathtub as sneaking around the house and singing. So in my head, I'm picturing like a gothic Kool-Aid man on Broadway. And as the Kool-Aid man is sneaking around, he's searching for Elaine, because for some reason in the last book, when Elaine was dipped into his innards, he looked at her and said, "Smash." So it steals Elaine. Then Feyre takes some more polyjuice potion and becomes Nympho Chick to try to infiltrate the King of Hybern's castle, but in doing so gets in trouble, and who comes to save her? Tammy Boy. Then Morrigan tells Fey that she prefers vajayjays over panenes, but she's afraid to come out. So Fey says there's no reason to be afraid. This city is very progressive. Then Febe finds the mirror of Erised, looks into it and sees her dead parents. Wait, I think it's another book. She looks into the mirror and sees her deepest, darkest problems and everything wrong with her, but now she loves herself more because blah, 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 independent woman, grabs the mirror and takes it back to the Bone Boy. And then they go battle some more, but Rumpelstiltskin, the Page Master, and the Bone Boy show up to fight for them. And then Tammy shows up to help him, and I'm thinking, I like this character arc. Please don't ruin it. But unfortunately, the gothic Kool-Aid man shows up and kills the Bone Boy. And a lot of death is going on, and they're about to lose the war to the King of Hybern, but then Feyre's papa shows up with 3 ships, one named after each daughter, but is quickly killed by the King of Hybern, along with Rumpelstiltskin. So Nesta tries to kill the king, can't pull it off, and then Elaine the Brain steps in and stabs the king. Now the king is dead, hooray! But nobody knows that, so they all continue fighting. Then Amren tells Feyre that she wants to jump in the cauldron to try to free herself. Then Mor runs in and says, "What is it?" And Feyre says, "She's going to sacrifice herself." And then Mor says, "No, you can't. There must be another way." But Amren does it anyway. She jumps in the cauldron, breaks it, becomes a supernatural dragon, kills all the bad guys, and then dies. Now all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put the magical bathtub back together again. But Rhys puts it back together, and then he dies. Then Feyre goes ballistic and makes all the High Lords sprinkle fairy dust on him to try to bring him back to life, but it doesn't work because they're missing one High Lord. That High Lord happens to be Tamlin, who shows up. Feyre begs him to please bring Daddy Rhys's pieces back to life. Tamlin looks at Feyre and says, "Be happy, girl." So Rhys comes back to life, but he's not alone. He brought Amren, the magical dragon, back with him. Then Feyre goes and sees her dead dad, and rather than bring him back to life, she decides to just burn him. Then everybody goes home happy, credits roll, and the Disney Pixar logo pops up. Long story short, this book wasn't as good as the second one, but it wasn't bad. So for that reason alone, I'll give it 3.5 bathtubs. And next up, A Court of Frost and Starlight. So stay tuned.